Today's focus is the unpacking of a comment made by J.B. Streubel on another show. And the focus is the fact that J.B. Streubel is arguing that GM and other OEMs haven't fully committed to EVs despite the success Tesla has enjoyed. Our contention is the opposite. They've actually fully committed, but when you stick to a 25% vertical integration, it's hard to meet a company that's doing 80% vertical integration. This is Greg for Teslafaninsight. Thanks once again for joining us. If this is your first time, welcome. If you're a repeat visitor, welcome back. We also want to thank our Patreon supporters. If you'd like tips and ideas on better investing and trading with Tesla as we enter an important period, please join us on Patreon. I also wanted to invite you to like and subscribe. And please note that this is a copyrighted broadcast. Any use of the material provided here is prohibited. So so today's show may be a friends-only show. And the reason is that we could have done like 4 different titles for this show because of how the information we're providing lines up. For example, there's a concept called a research university versus a teaching university. So in most teaching universities, the goal is to have people memorize a set of facts and kind of regurgitate them in test quizzes, etc. In a research university, you actually have people involved in a whole bunch of sort of brand new research, and people can actually learn the subjects that are underlying that research almost on the side as they're doing whatever the research might be. So it's just a whole different philosophy in terms of how things are done. And when we look at the auto industry, we actually ended up with a very interesting situation where Bob Lutz indicated that one of the ways that Tesla would be defeated by GM and the other OEMs is because they had the ability to buy the supply chain, so identify suppliers, and in essence, buy the supply chain away from Tesla, therefore starving Tesla of vitally needed components. And therefore, they would win in that fashion. So when the Model S came out, and even going back to the process of the bolt and volt, this strategy was being implemented because it's worked great for the last 100 years. As we all know, there's a little problem with this strategy. And the little problem was articulated by the discussion had by Tesla/Elon and his management team. And that focused on the fact that they actually went and made an attempt to buy enough batteries for 100,000 vehicles. And they were informed by the major Korean manufacturers that the batteries associated in 2013 with 100,000 vehicles equaled the number of batteries that existed for everything on the face of planet Earth. So hence the goal that Tesla had of simply going through the supply chain, getting batteries needed, and executing was not done, not because they didn't want to, but because the battery supplies didn't exist, hence the building of the first gigafactory. So this sort of articulates the fact that, you know, there's a concept in military history that says that the next war is being fought with the tools of the last war. So if you're in a situation where literally there's no batteries to be had and you have to build that factory, how are you going to buy the supply chain away when the supply chain, you have to create it for it to exist? Very interesting problem. So J.B. Streubel's argument was he wasn't seeing a full commitment from the large OEMs around the world because he hasn't seen them go to the point that Tesla has of reverse integration all the way back to mines to make sure the raw materials that would be used, particularly in the batteries, has been secured in large supply over a long distance of time. So I bring this up because we're in an interesting position right now, and that is what's going to happen to all these OEMs and big companies. J.B. Streubel's argument is that if they don't commit to a full vertical integration in the fashion I just described, they basically go out of business because there's scale batteries to be purchased, particularly with how much demand there is and the number of OEMs doesn't exist. And so if you don't vertically integrate fully and commit to it, you'll be out of business. When you're claiming you'll be fully electric in a few years, there's just not the raw material there to support the announced plans that these large companies have. This show is somewhat unusual because if you think about it, there's this interesting problem coming up, which is, in essence, Stanford, a research university, versus, if you will, GM's university that's attached to it in terms of process. So yes, there's incremental development going on in terms of research at those facilities, but in terms of radical look at how things work and why, and what to do, it's a totally different ballgame about what these different universities are committed to teaching and developing. So in essence, we have a big problem, which is there's actually a new management concept that was presented by Elon, where he talked about the fact that there's something, he really doesn't have a management process. If he does have a process, he calls it physics management. So the idea basically is walking through problems and solving them and then building the business around it. So for example, if you have an electric vehicle and you need charging stations and there are no charging stations, do you A, wait for suppliers to potentially build them, or B, build them yourself? And now they're optimized for the use of your vehicles. And so in this case, there was no supply chain to be purchased on charging. Hence, Elon went ahead and started building and has an extensive charging network, which is one of the competitive advantages that Tesla has over a lot of these companies. So in essence, there's an example of how physics would manage a business, especially in sort of new technology that we're seeing currently. So there's actually, as another angle of looking at this, there's actually a company called Oracle Corporation. So Oracle obviously is a very successful software firm. There's a firm that's a Stanford startup called VMware. And so VMware does virtual machines. The core logic of VMware was the fact that you had all these servers out there that had been purchased, and the servers typically were using less than 30% of the capability of those machines. And so what VMware was able to help people do is, in essence, take one machine and virtually create numerous computers on one machine. And now both the cost of servers drop because, in theory, you have 1/3 less servers. You also have to heat and cool all those servers and the size of the server farm that would exist. So there are all these costs that were reduced by the transition to VMware. The thing, though, it's interesting about it is that when Oracle saw what VMware is doing and how it would affect the industry, because, for example, there's less software needed if you have fewer servers, they actually announced what's called vaporware. They announced that they would, in essence, over a several-year period, destroy VMware by delivering products similar in nature over time. As you know, VMware is still very, very successful, so the vaporware that Oracle produced really didn't do the damage that they had anticipated. And this is sort of the situation when we look at what's going on with GM. So I'm a bit surprised by J.B. Streubel's comments about lack of full commitment, because in the software game, virtualware or virtual software that's announced but doesn't exist is also an axiom of the industry for those who are behind what competitors are delivering. So what I wanted to sort of really get at here is the fact that, based on J.B. Streubel's argument, there's a whole new discussion here about, well, who are the OEMs major around the world? We all know them. Obviously, the biggest being Toyota, and then we bounce through, Germany with all BMW, Mercedes, etc., and obviously in the U.S., Ford, etc. His argument, and I kind of would agree, is that unless these firms choose to completely vertical integrate all the way back to the mines, it's a sign that they may not exist in the business, because for now, the competition they face from Tesla and others that have done this vertical integration, it isn't a major problem. But as time steps forward and Tesla becomes bigger, etc., you'll find that the firms that have not fully committed to this vertical integration, in essence, go out of business. So I would agree with him on that point. But it's my belief that the biggest problem is not that GM, et cetera, has not committed. It's the fact that if your business model for 100 years demands that you transition to a 25% vertically integration and then buy the rest from suppliers, that process has a different how you get things done. So as a result, Bob Lutz was talking about, hey, Tesla is in trouble because they're actually building battery factories that once sort of battery supplies catch up, Tesla will be at a competitive disadvantage, given that they have these very expensive factories that are sitting there that are now replicated by suppliers to all the OEMs. And as you know, the problem is that those suppliers that were supposed to be there have not shown up at the scale that is needed by the large OEMs. Hence, those firms have begun building their own factories in line with Tesla's process, obviously GM being a key example in their partnership with LG. The challenge, though, is, yes, GM is doing this vertical integration because it's non-vertical integration for many reasons, one of them being it doesn't tie up as much cash. The problem, though, is, as we can see, what is GM going to do when it has to produce 500,000 vehicles that are EVs and they don't have the batteries for it because they can't buy it in the marketplace and they don't have the vertical integration into the mines to get the raw materials to deliver those batteries? And again, this is what J.B. Streubel's argument is, and where Tesla is really shining right now in terms of consuming batteries for all manner of electric vehicles and power walls, etc., but also vertically integrating and doing the research to deliver different sort of battery chemistries. And so I thought one of the funniest, most interesting contributions to this dialogue was that there's an area in science called material science. And Elon Musk famously made a comment during an interview with Goldie and a number of others, I believe, but actually it might have been the interview that he did with Sandy Munro, where he said one of Tesla's big focus is material science, and that's what his PhD was going to be in at Stanford. And it turns out that the material science focus for the firm, he made the argument that Tesla may have the best material science department anywhere on planet Earth. And I would argue that what if Tesla, until now, had the only material science department on planet Earth, and GM and others had chosen to outsource solutions when it came to this aspect of car building, and now they're going to have to go build their own departments so they actually compete with Tesla, because there are a lot of incremental decisions that are being made in that material science space that, if it's in-house versus out-of-house, can be modified to have a big impact on what's going to happen with your firm and its future. So I guess the argument I'm making here is that, wait a second, there's an interesting process here, which is Tesla's physics management process represents the best core logic for getting vehicles produced in this space. And the non-vertical integration process of companies like GM, that's 25% vertically integrated, is a diametrically opposed to the structure that it's going to take to deliver a victory in the future. And so, yes, we see GM and others starting to modify, but they truly don't seem to be committed to it, because in order to be committed to it, you would have heard them vertically and integrating all the way back to the mines to ensure that on a certain schedule they can deliver scale batteries to be a part of the solution for their vehicles. So I think this whole thing is really fascinating, because the quick demise of Tesla that's been predicted by many, including Bob Lutz, really doesn't happen or exist when you have this problem of structural vertical integration or non-integration as a competition between Tesla and the OEMs. And the long-term effects of this are very deep. Just as a final note on this, you'll notice that anytime you vertically integrate, one of the benefits of non-vertical integration is you get 30, 60, 90-day terms with your suppliers, and you can now use those terms as one way to finance yourself. Well, once you start vertically integrated, grading down to raw materials, you have the problem of, wait a second, there's a lot of cash that now has to stay within the business that might have been getting distributed quicker because you had this process of how cash was being managed. It is a disadvantage of Tesla to be 80-90% integrated, and because every time the car is sold, that cash has to be quickly put back into the system. So it is the Tesla drawback. But as we've seen thus far, the growth rate associated with great profit margins allows this to work out pretty well. So I would say that we're in a very interesting period here, where I have to say JB Streubel is right in the sense that if in fact you have the competitors who choose to fully commit and go vertical are going to exist, and the ones that don't end up with incremental disadvantage across their supply chain that results in them going out of business. And I think that there are a number of companies, including GM, that potentially suffer this fate. So at any rate, I want to thank you for taking time out to join us. Just a reminder, we have some SpaceX shares. Also wanted to encourage you to join us on Patreon. Reminder, please take time to like and subscribe. And hey, I want to recommend you go to the startup interview that has JB Streubel's comments on it, because he's a smart guy, and it's nice to see him getting out and doing battery recycling, his own business outside of Tesla, and having a chance to sort of spread his wings and show his capabilities. And I'll remind you, JB Streubel is the one that started at 14 to try to figure out how to use batteries from laptops to actually get cars, to electric vehicles to run. And he's one of the key founders of Tesla, and worth every penny of exposure. For today, I just wanted to review, one of our docs had recommended that prior to lovemaking, you have a small salad or something to that effect. And the reason is because blood flow to your stomach won't interrupt blood flow to other extremities that might be useful in lovemaking space. Is our recommendation. From a health tip today, we have a full list down below if there's interest. Next, we want to say thank you again for joining us. We're going to put our usual nature sounds at the end of this show for your enjoyment. Tschüss German, au revoir French, Leith Road, Hebrew, Choda Hafez, Farsi, Strasi, Russian, Ni hao ma, Chinese, Konbanwa, Japanese, Heido, Swedish, Strasi, Russian, Ni hao ma, Chinese. And in Jamaica, we say, enough respect, walk good man. Thanks for joining us. Have a great day, and bye for now.